Welcome back to another episode of Choose Courage Inc., where we help creatives, entrepreneurs, and aspiring corporate escape artists break free from the systems that were never built for them and create businesses where people, creativity, and courage come first. I'm Vivianne Castillo, founder of Choose Courage Inc., and friend of the podcast, Michael Davis, returns in this episode, and this conversation gets real fast. Michael left a Fortune 100 design career, the kind you build over 17 years, after his body basically forced the decision for him. He was running DEI programs post George Floyd, watching the funding in the will evaporate quarter after quarter, and it honestly just made him sick. Not metaphorically, like blood work sick. So he left. And he built Tiny Cup Coffee, this whole brand rooted in rest and resistance to grind culture. He has since moved his entire family to Egypt, and he wrote a book called Coffee Rest Rituals, and now he's dreaming up a third thing, a design studio for food and beverage brands. And so we get into what it means to pivot a second time, when there's no villain to point at anymore, just you and the version of yourself you thought was doing fine. And we have a metaphor for you that I think is gonna live in your head rent-free. We also talk about rest as ritual instead of reward. We get into grief and identity and how to figure out if something's actually yours to chase. So if you're in that in-between right now, the meantime season, as I like to call it, not sure you're leaving or what you're walking toward, this one's for you. So grab some water, my lovely dehydrated friends, and let's get into it. Yo, Michael, I'm super excited for you to be chatting it up with me. I want to just jump right in. Maybe let's start in the middle of a pivot. Can you take me to a specific moment, recent or further back, when you realized the path you were on needed to change? Just where were you? What did you notice? What's the tea?
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing me on. I love talking with you. I'm a friend of the podcast and we have good conversations. So I'm excited to talk about the pivot. So I think where I always start when we talk about, the moment that changed things for me is my time in corporate. And kind of what was the moment that I realized I don't want to do this anymore, but I don't know what I want to do, but I can't do this. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it had to hit the ceiling. It had to hit the fan when I started becoming literally sick. Like I was becoming emotionally unwell, psychologically unwell. It was to a point where I wasn't able to show up for myself or my family in the ways that I had promised myself and my family. And so, just to give your listeners some more context, we're talking like post 2020, post corporate commitments to DEI, commitments post George Floyd, where at this particular Fortune 100, I've built this program that is really aiming to help this company make good on these promises to the communities they claim to serve. And yet in the few years flowing after 2020, I'm seeing commitments to equity-centered design, waiver, falter. I'm seeing DEI research and programming go unfunded after building programs and staffing those programs. And just kind of finding myself in this cycle quarter after quarter, convincing people in power and in leadership roles the value of Black and brown life. And I think that was causing my spirit to just deteriorate. And when I say I was unhealthy, I don't mean that in like a metaphorical sense. Like I literally had to go get my blood checked and found all of these deficiencies that were causing me to be depressed and need to change my diet and affecting my mood. And so I think, recognizing that, having a conversation with my family and coming to the decision that like, I can't do this anymore. And I'm going to trust that there's something on the other side of this if I make a decision for the better, for my health and for my family. And so that's ultimately when I left the company and eventually went on to found Tiny Cup Coffee. And that was supposed to be something built around this whole ethos of rest and resistance to the grind culture that I was caught up in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what I really love about that is you knew before you necessarily had language to it, right? Mm. Because I think that's the part that people skip when they reflect on this story for themselves is that a pivot doesn't announce itself in a strategy meeting, right? It shows up in the body first. months
Yeah.
before it shows up on your calendar of something that you need to do. And I think that a lot of times we tend to override when our body is saying, yo, slow down, this isn't working, we're not good. But that override is a skill that many of us have built on purpose.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think a lot of us have language for what we're feeling. And, that's where our relationship has been so meaningful, because I think through having, a space to kind of learn the language of emotional endurance, for example, and realize, oh, this is the thing that's lacking in this moment. This is why I can't continue. Having that language is so important, because it really shifts the energy from guilt and shame to, no, there's something actually wrong with the system that I'm in, and the environment needs to change, right? And it's not me necessarily that needs to change in every case, but it's like, this, I've outgrown this situation, or this is no longer serving me. And that, I think that realization opens up so many windows to opportunity for your work and for your life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, like noting the difference between emotional endurance and just endurance. I think a lot of us don't realize how much we've been conditioned to just endure, which is why that overriding thing that we often do is something that we do on purpose, because we override and neglect ourselves because, we're told that if we do so, we'll get ahead, that things will just get better over time.
Yeah.
But in reality, like we don't have to endure just for enduring's sake. Emotional endurance requires you to be more in tune with who you are and what you want and what you need. And a lot of us have been in those environments, whether that's personal, only to then be reinforced by corporate, where we have a hard time acknowledging and then acting on what we want and need.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, yeah. So I know that you've pivoted before, from 17-year design career into founding Tiny Cup. I'm curious about, how is the pivot you're navigating now different from that first leap? Because I know that you're cooking up a couple new things too.
Yeah. So I'm in a very different place emotionally, spiritually, geographically.
I love
Yeah, and we can get into some of that.
it.
But I think the way I'm thinking about your question is, so I mean, I've launched some businesses over the past year and a half in addition to Tiny Cup Coffee. And part of that isn't just to put more on my plate. Some of it has actually been strategic, I hope. I'm thinking about these businesses as, as like, I'm thinking about the economics of them. Like, how do I protect the dream that I left corporate to pursue? And how do these businesses help provide some base for me to protect that dream and continue to pursue it with the same energy and creativity that I wanted to initially? And so I think what's different now with this pivot is that it isn't really about leaving something that previously was no longer serving me or really really unhealthy for me. Rather, I think this time it's about, how do I build something supportive, some environmental infrastructure, systemize what I'm doing in a way that helps me to redesign my life into the most sustainable expression of who I am and who I want to be, and the kind of where I want to be placing my time and my energy as far as business is concerned.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you feel like this second pivot is harder or easier than the first one?
Oh, that's good. I don't know. I think it's actually easier. I think it's
Okay.
easier. Yeah, I think it's easier because the vision is still intact, like the original one, right? It's clearer
Mm,
to me. The first one felt really unclear and hard because I was leaving something for something completely unknown. I pivoted, but I didn't know what I was pivoting to yet.
mm,
But I knew I had some skills. I knew I had some interests. I had some passions, and I went through maybe 6, 7 months of figuring out, well, what is it that I'm going to pursue in order to feed my family? And so that was really hard work. And it was emotional work too, because I was panicking in that
mm.
period of, what if I find nothing? What if I have to go back into corporate? All of these what ifs, a lot of
Yeah.
fear driven things were going through my mind. But now, I still, even in all of the transitioning that I'm doing outside of just business, I still find myself anchored to the decision I made to start Tiny Cup Coffee.
Mm.
And I felt connected and anchored to that even when my customer volume has been low, or even when my productivity week by week has been a little low or off or inconsistent. I still felt like I'm making the right choice. And so in the startup of these other factions, I still felt, I'm not turning my attention, which that happens a lot, right? With entrepreneurs, we see the shiny red object and we're like, oh, you know what, maybe this thing over here isn't working. I need to go chase that thing over there. Or this is the trend that I'm seeing on social media. We have all of these new AI startups, right? And so I never felt like in trying something in addition to what I was doing, I was leaving that thing. It always felt supportive of it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Well, I was curious because I was talking to a client of mine a few weeks or so ago. They're also coming towards the midpoint of a second pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, I feel like it's harder. And I was curious. I was like, okay, what makes you say it's harder? And they're like, well, the second time around, there's no villain. The first time I can point at the org, my toxic manager, or whatever else the system did to me. But he was like, this time though, the only thing standing between me and the change is a version of myself who I thought was doing fine or fine enough. And he's like, so you end up then having to potentially confront some of the things that are keeping you from pursuing the second pivot. Whereas in the first one, I could blame all these other things I'd been through, these things I need to detox as slowing me down. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's super interesting.
That is very interesting to even just to characterize it of like what's the villain here.
Yeah.
I want to use that framing because that's juicy.
Yeah.
So if I were to think about the question in terms of what is the villain here, I was gonna get deep and be like, oh, the villain's myself. But actually, I think, but I think maybe the villain in this second pivot is the villain is not pursuing the initial vision with the wherewithal needed to realize it, right? To get to the
Mm,
finish line. And so, in other words, I think of this pivot not so much of, the villain that I have to defeat in order to achieve this thing. I think of it more as sometimes on the journey, you have to pause to gather provisions, right? In
yeah.
order to continue the journey. Like you're going to run out of gas, or you're going to run out of this, or you're going to realize you need these skills, or you're going to realize you need this kind of safety net or infrastructure in order
Hmm.
to stay focused on the vision. Sometimes you have to make that pit stop. And I think maybe that gets into, you know, some of the misconceptions that I carried about what the pivot was and what I realized along the way the pivot actually is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That tracks. That tracks. Yeah, because it makes me think about, I'm in the midst of my other pivot. I started Humanity Centered in the spring of 2020 and ran it for about 5 years and then wound it down at the end of 2025. And a lot of that was because, towards the end of Humanity Centered, I was working with executives, chief people officers about how to create healthier workplace environments. A lot of the work we were doing when we were called in, it's because things like were not okay and weren't good. So I was really in the thick of it of corporate trauma that people were in. And I realized that a lot of my work was around helping people to stay. And I actually wanted to help people be more free. And so I ended up winding down Humanity Centered and leaning more into Choose Courage Inc. Choose Courage Inc. was started about a year or so before that, but it was started within Humanity Centered. So I separated it and started to run and lead into it fully in 2026. And when I think about this pivot, I felt like it was easier than the first one because I had a lot of lessons and learnings from the first one. I had a lot of things I would tell my younger entrepreneurial self. I feel like I had more exposure to things that could and couldn't work, but more importantly, I have just known and understood myself better. What do I need? What do I want? What I won't compromise on? And so it's felt easier in that way. I think the hard part is, yeah, when things aren't going at the speed that I want or the direction that I want, it's really about confronting my fear. Like my villain is probably fear.
Mm.
It's the moments of doubt, the will this work out? What if it doesn't work out? And I remember, I think it was like a month or so ago, I was having this crash out. It happens, you just kind of get in your head about how things are going and what they don't work out and all these things. And my partner was like, I think you're just having a crash out. I think you should just eat something and take a nap.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, sometimes you just need to sleep on it and come back with a, what do I always say, like open mind and a, fresh heart, just to be curious about what that was about. And I realized that it was a lot of like old fear resurfacing itself in just a different form. But it's not new news,
Yeah.
these fears, these thoughts that we all struggle with. But sometimes they try to appear in our life as if they are new.
Yeah, yeah. And that really resonates for me. Just the acknowledgement that maybe you're just crashing out and you need these really human things to just kind of come back to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, sharing vulnerably here, like I go through maybe every 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, I go through kind of this downward swoop of depression and a lot of doubt, a lot of I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. And I just kind of sit in this like low space where I don't feel like I can pick up anything. I don't feel like I can be productive. I don't see a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. And my spouse always reminds me like, just you need to drink more water. You probably need to go to sleep on time. You need to wake up on time. And in thinking about like the pivot and what I'm pivoting to in this second opportunity, it's not just business. It's also like, how do I protect the life I'm building too? Because part of pursuing this particular business in this particular ethos around rest is that I want to live up to it as well. Like I want to live a life where I can prioritize rest when I get lost in the rat race or the cycle of things. And so I had mentioned a moment ago, like really coming to an understanding of what does it mean to pivot. I think before and so many of us think about pivoting as something that means we're going away from the goal or like away from the business or the project or the vision, and or maybe we think we're leaving something behind that's a part of our identity and we're starting with absolutely nothing all over again.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about basketball. You and I love basketball.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, what's the function of the pivot foot in basketball? Like, why does it happen? Why do we do it? And like functionally, it's you pivot in order to avoid the traveling violation when the offensive player picks up the ball and holds it and they're not dribbling, right? But also the objective or the outcome of the pivot is that you can protect the ball. The pivot is used to sometimes create space between you and the defensive player. And if you have that space, you can see the floor better. If you have that space, you might realize you have an open shot, right? And sometimes the situation demands that you pivot not to something or away from something else, but to see what options you have. And sometimes it might just mean continuing with the thing that you have, but you just needed that moment or that separation or that space.
Ooh, I like that. The pivot in basketball, there's kind of three purposes. The pivot allows you to see maybe things you weren't able to see before. It allows you to ask for help because when you pivot, more times, sometimes you need to pass the ball or see who else on your team can help you in that moment. And the pivot is also there to help you protect what's important to you, what you need in that moment. And I think there's a lot of, I hope someone can see through that metaphor of like, if you need to pivot, it's because you need to protect something that maybe
Yeah.
you've put on the back burner or that you forgot to protect. You need to see what else is possible or you need to ask for help.
Yeah.
But pivots also ask us to loosen our grip on an identity, right? That many of us have worked so hard to build. I'm curious about what part of yourself have you had to confront or outgrow in this season of change?
So I think in order for me to think about that, like I have to think about the identities that I've held before. And I know that, for the last 17, 18 years, I've been crafting this identity as a designer, specifically a designer who's sitting at the intersection of design and DEI. And in the pivot from corporate to coffee, I found myself confronting this intrusive thought of I don't know enough about coffee or the industry to create a company. I don't know enough, and that's a fear-driven thought. And I ultimately pursued it because I believed that I do have a relationship with coffee, that it's informed by my personal experience of treating coffee like a drug, as so many of us do. And I did conversely have an experience where, you know, I got to sit with family members and experience the coffee traditions among indigenous coffee growers in our family, and come to realize that through community, I had this relationship with coffee that resembled a ritual and a restorative kind of measure that felt like it was keeping me grounded and has kept them grounded for generations. And so, with that, thinking about who I am as a designer in the traditional sense or in a conventional sense, what does it look like for me to now design a restful experience that pays homage to what I'm experiencing with my family and with these communities, and then share that with others for them to allow them to change their relationship to coffee.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like too there's this moment of confrontation where, just because you decide to, start a new thing, pivot into a new business, career, whatever it is, that doesn't mean that the old identities that we have just fall away. If
Yeah.
anything, I feel like there's almost this moment of grief that needs to happen in that recognition, because I think a lot of folks that I talk to these days, they have a hard time pivoting into an idea, a business idea, betting on themselves, leaving a career that's not serving them anymore because of the sunken cost fallacy. I've already put so much
Mm.
time and effort and energy into this identity, into this thing that people know me for. And if I step away from it, what else will I have left? How will people recognize me? How will they know me? How will
Yeah.
I derive meaning out of what I'm doing? I'm curious if you ever noticed any of those notes in your journey as well.
Yeah, I'm actually experiencing that right now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I don't know if this is going to be like a third pivot, but it's another idea that I'm feeling free enough to like experiment with and just see what happens. Not overly committing to it, but just what's this thing over here? Let's play with this. And that is the idea of Tiny Cup serving as a studio for other food and beverage businesses out there who are trying to think about how to express their brand identity. I was having this conversation with you, with my brother, with family members, like, well, I've already changed from being this designer to a coffee roaster. What is this Tiny Cup Studio thing? Well, I think some of the tension that I've been feeling in the last 3 years since I've had this company is I miss design, Vivianne. I miss being a designer. I miss being, pushing all of these pixels. The one thing
Yeah.
that usurps most of my time when I should be in the spreadsheets is like nudging things on my website because I love design work. So,
Yeah.
so, could I create a space for myself where I can spend my time doing the creative work that I love so much and still make it make sense in the context of coffee? And one thing my brother said to me was like, well, nobody else has done it. So why not give it a shot? Which initially could be like a scared something to scare myself with. Well, nobody else has done it. Well, that's exactly why I should try to do it and see what happens. I have nothing to lose. And
Definitely.
I think there is a market for it. I think there is a market for food and beverage businesses, and maybe not just them, who maybe lack the creative power to express what they want to for their brand identities in a way that I know I'm able to, that I've been able to do with Tiny Cup. And to be able to partner with a company like that who knows that I understand what it means to be situated in the food and beverage space, but yet have a really good understanding of how to translate that into cover art or into a logo or into language. I think there's a market for it, and I think if it jumps off, it'll be fun to do.
Yeah, I mean, you already know my vote on it. I think you should do it. I think I mentioned you should explore something like this last year. But I,
Mm-hmm.
I I think what is pulling me from that story is, yes, a desire to get back into design, but I really think at the heart of your work and why I've loved working with you in the past, even when you were in corporate, when you were in your design career, is your heart for people.
Mm.
And I think a lot of coffee brands, food service industry folks could use some support in how do you be felt and remembered by the people that you're serving and your customers. And that's where working with you can come into play. And as I see, more of the AI schlop and whatever this reality that we're living in these days, I do think that people are going to be leaning harder into storytelling, into things that help them feel creative and connected again. And so I think you're in a really good point of position to explore something like this. And I hope you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that observation. You just reminded me, as I'm thinking about all of the quote unquote creative work that's out in the space right now from AI. Look, I love I love what AI can do. I love the possibility of it. I think there's a way to collaborate with it that allows you to produce something really meaningful and good and honest. But I remember there was somebody who posted something like, all of this stuff, all of these flyers people are putting out are so tacky and you're wasting water and my time. And that made me laugh. But to your point, I think there's going to be a natural push for something more analog in the way that people think about how to express themselves. And so I'm looking to be maybe on the front end of that, or just be waiting for it, or find those partners who still value the kind of human thinking process to getting to the ideas out into the world.
Yeah. How do you stand out in a world where AI is making everything look and feel the same?
Mm-hmm.
It makes me curious about, how do you sit with the uncertainty between this isn't working anymore or something feels like a little off, I should explore something new, and I know what's next, right? Like what does that in between actually look like for you?
Yeah, this one feels, well, my answer I think will be very simple, but it's something that really I think does take time and the skill of listening. But I
Hmm.
asked this same question, or a version of this question, to my big sister. And my sister gave me some really, really good advice. This was before I shifted locations and changed my entire geography. I was like on the fence about whether I wanted to move, and I wanted to move outside of the US. And my sister said, you know, she was like, you need to pay attention to the thoughts and the feelings and the ideas that make your chest expand. And which of those ideas make your chest contract? And
Hmm.
so that's been my barometer for a lot of things since then. When I think about this, does my chest contract in a way where I don't want to feel this way? And I'm not just talking about discomfort with the thing you know you need to do, because more often than not, I believe the thing you know you need to do actually makes your chest expand. You just feel nervous about it, or maybe worried about it, or afraid to do it. And being afraid to do something isn't synonymous with your chest contracting, So when you think about the possibility of this thing, when you're dreaming or imagining this possibility, whether it's a new business or it's living in a new location or it's this or that, if your chest expands before the fear comes and shuts it down, it's probably the thing that I need to keep moving towards, even if it's baby steps.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I know for me, when I found myself in between this, place of this isn't working anymore and I know what's next, I try to put a name to that season. And I just say,
Mm.
like, I just call it in the meantime. I'm in the meantime season. Try to give it a place and a purpose in my life. And when I am in the meantime kind of season, I try to treat that stretch as a hallway. I know it's connecting me to something. Like, it's, not all for nothing. And how do I stay open? How do I get curious? I do have a couple things I tend to lean into when I am in those
Mm.
seasons. One
Mm.
is this go-to book of mine called The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. And I love it because it always grounds me again back into connection with my creativity and wonder. Because when I'm in the meantime seasons, I need to be more open, not more constrained, not more guarded or closed off. I need to be more curious. I need to be more in tune with what my gut is saying, what my spirit wants. And sometimes I need reminders of what is actually real in those seasons. Like, I remember one time I was talking to my partner about this new idea, that I wanted to implement. And I was like, I'm so nervous. What if it doesn't work out? And he's like, well, maybe it's not about you being nervous. It's about you telling yourself you're excited. It's like, you're not nervous, you're
Mm.
excited. It's like, that's what's happening. And I'm
Yeah.
like, you're right. I'm excited. And that's why I'm
Yeah.
nervous. It's like, no, you're excited. You're not nervous. And so even just those like mindset shifts have really helped me to be in those hallways, in the meantime, so I can be curious and not run back to the other end of the hallway that I'm walking through and walking away from,
Mhm.
but I can continue that momentum and move towards where I need to be.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a tool that I'm going to add to my bag as well. It reminds me of when you are at the fair or at an adventure park and you're at the top of the slide and it's like a really big slide or a really big drop and you're nervous, but you're actually really excited. You want this experience. You just don't know what it is because you haven't done it before.
Yeah.
And eventually, you allow yourself to go and you take the ride and you get to the end of it and you're like, yo, I'm so glad I did it. And that's what it reminds me of. I'm curious, 'cause I want to ask you, when you're talking about, the vision or the dream, and I forget how you're phrasing it, but I was thinking, is there a difference, or is there a season in which your dream is supposed to be imaginative and have a lot of breadth versus practical? And is one necessarily bad or good? Because I think there's so many people in different situations where your dream isn't any less of a good dream just because it's practical and it makes sense in this particular season. And then, is imaginative synonymous with romantic and unrealistic? Like, how do you think about imagination and practicality when it comes to the pivot?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that question. I think for me, I would probably say I'm in some sort of perpetual state of lucid dreaming. There's
Mm.
always something of wonder, what if, what could it look like? But what transitions me from more of this lucid, unformed state of dreaming to something more practical is just taking action, experimenting, whether talking to a friend about the idea and seeing how they receive it. And so I think for those who are kind of in that in between, if you actually listen to the episode before this one, I do get a little bit into this of how do you move from this kind of like ambiguous, not understanding what you want to do to something more concrete. You can take a peep at that. We also do have the self-paced version of the walkout. If you are in this place of I know I want something different, but I don't know what that is. That's another great resource for you to check out. I'll put it in the description and in the comments. But for me, it's about how do I start to do little experiments? How do I actually feed that curiosity and see if there's fire there, if there's flames there? Because I'm someone who, something to know about me is I am like a dreamer. Like I have a bajillion ideas and I've learned to be okay with how I chase those ideas. So I will
Mhm.
go 110 miles per hour towards an idea. And then once I hit a wall, I'll just stop and pivot to something else. Like some of y'all don't know, I do have, like, I created a CBD coffee and tea brand. I probably spent a good year and a half on it. I have branding, trademarks, everything. And then I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. But I learned so much from that. I learned so much about the trademark process. How do we think about branding? How do you create something that resonates with people? So it wasn't all for naught, but it gave me clarity of, yeah, I don't want to build that right now. Doesn't mean I'm not going to one day. I'm actually right now learning how to roast coffee. I didn't tell you this, Michael.
What?
Yeah, there's
Tell.
a coffee shop in the city that I'm in, and I really love this coffee shop. And one day I was walking by and saw the owner was roasting coffee. They have a roasting section in the cafe. And I was like, "Oh, do you teach people how to roast?" And he said, "No, it's just usually my baristas, but what do you have in mind?" And I was like, "Well, what if we swap services? What if you teach me how to roast and I'll help you with your business?" So we're
Yeah.
swapping. He's going to teach me how to roast a few days a week starting in September. And then I'm going to help him with his business. What are ways to automate some things, increase revenue, things like that. But I love that too because there's a relationship there. There's an
Yeah.
exchange of services and value. And I'm learning, and so is he. But I would say since living in Mexico, like there is definitely an increased love for coffee because the coffee is good here. one.
Mm.
And two, there's a culture around it that's very different and is void of hyper capitalism than in the States.
Mm.
So I've been, who knows, maybe I'll spin up a coffee shop later on and then I'll pull on some of those past lessons and learnings. But the TLDR, going back to the original question, is just try, do something, see what resonates, see what doesn't, and take that information to inform your next step.
I love it. I love it. It feels like a very Kobe answer, like that real, meditative, thoughtful understanding of yourself, but coming through in a really honest answer. So thank you for that. Yeah. I'm excited about your coffee journey, man. Oh my goodness, you're gonna catch the bug. Oh my gosh, I'm excited.
I mean, I might, it also, my partner's a chef. So, right. And he's very talented, very gifted in what he does. So I think also being with someone who is very passionate about food and how that connects you with other people and connects your creativity in other ways, I think is definitely feeding that bug. So we'll see what comes of it. But
yeah,
poco a poco, as they say here, little by little.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. And I know you've talked about rest as a ritual, not a reward. Curious about, how does rest relate to clarity for you, especially in these seasons?
I love this question because it's also like one of the ones that I have to answer not just once but like continuously as I am building this business, because what I'm creating within Tiny Cup is something that's living and breathing, right? It's not just like a slogan and a brand ID and I put it out in the universe and just have this brand that's bringing in traffic and bringing in sales volume. Like, it's really a commitment to myself coming from what I came from. That's the whole intent of the pivot. So, I think my answer to that today, when I think about this relationship between what rest is and how I get to clarity, the simple answer is that discernment needs stillness, right? And so this is probably also true for many of us, that clarity or like having a sense of direction rarely arrives when we're constantly pushing and we're constantly grinding. And it arrives more often, I think, when we have the time to actually pause, when we have the time to take a moment and think and feel our feelings and think our thoughts. And I think it's in those moments that we have the space to sit, when I have the space to sit long enough and to listen carefully enough, that I actually reach some discernment about what's next. And, if it requires more energy, more pushing from me, or if it requires me to stop and pivot again. It never happens when I'm busy performing productivity. It's like the difference between planning your day and just going and doing your day, hoping that, you'll get to the outcome or the result you're looking for. The difference between having a plan and like having sat to think about how you want your hours to look is a remarkably different outcome. One of the questions I asked myself on Monday is, what do I want to feel like by Friday? What did I want to feel by the end of the week when I look back? Did I pay attention to how I felt? Did I rest when I needed to rest? Did I drink water when I needed to drink water? Did I pause that business decision and push it to next week because I just wasn't in the space to do it? How do I want to feel by Friday? Is a really important question to ask yourself.
I love that. And I remember you asked me that question once, because sometime a year or so ago, I was telling you about, here are all the things I'm hoping to accomplish this week. And you said, okay, but how do you want to feel by the time you get to Friday? And then what if you designed your week in light of that? And I've never forgotten that. And it's something I think about often. So I want to thank you again for that gift.
Yeah.
I think as we talk about rest, and I'm sure a lot of folks who are listening to this, there comes this moment where you need to detox from your understanding of what rest is. I think rest as a reward means that rest is something you have to earn with output first. And in those moments, then it stops being rest. It becomes payment. And you can't hear your own next direction over the sound of earning your own rest. And that is like a deeper detox thing that a lot of us have to do, because these companies have conditioned us, you earn your rest. You work a certain amount of time put in a certain amount of hours, you then get a certain amount of rest. But that's not the case. We need to kind of detox and detach ourselves from this belief and understanding that you must earn your rest, which is why I see and talk to a lot of people who take a sabbatical or they take their 2 weeks off and they come back with nothing, still come back feeling empty because they spent the whole time performing recovery well enough to justify having taken it. And the reality is that clarity doesn't arrive on a deadline you set for it. So, rest, and at least for me, yes, has to be baked in and intentional. I do have these things called rest and resist weeks that I purposely built into all of my businesses. Week off in the spring, week off in the fall, 2 consecutive weeks off in the summer. I make my team take the rest. I tell my clients, you can't talk to me during this rest. But then I also have these moments of, because I have to self sabotage myself because, especially because I really enjoy what I do, it's easy for me to then justify not resting, but I know I need it. So I do have these random dates and times throughout the year where I also take additional days off or just rest. And I'll try and self sabotage myself by booking like a non refundable Airbnb, by, booking things in advance or doing things that require me to step outside of my normal rhythm so that my past self can take care of my future self.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I think thinking about what rest is and trying to give some definition to it, some practicum to it is an important step, especially for me, because as a brand strategist, you can get kind of wrapped up in the language of things. There's starting to be kind of a shift and a push for other companies in various spaces to use this language of rest, and mindfulness had its wave. But I think really taking this language and applying it to real tangible things in your life is the best way to stay accountable to your human needs. I think so. I wrote a book called Coffee Rest Rituals last year, and this was probably one of the important steps that I needed to take to fulfill this promise of like, what does it actually mean to rest? Not just this lofty language of rest and resistance and restoration and ritual, but this was a chance for me to put in writing what are the things that I do when I'm preparing my coffee that feel like rest to me and actually do have an effect on the way that I spend my day or my morning. And so in this book, like I talk about how to use the five senses, the things that are already with you as a human being, your sense of taste, your sense of smell, your ability to hear, all of these different ways of experiencing. And we're all different in the way that we experience things. How do you use these natural gifts to take in something that could be so mundane? When I wake up in the morning and I make my coffee, that could just be like a 5-minute thing in order to get out the door and on to the next thing. Or it could be a 5-minute thing that I'm really paying attention to. What is the sound of the gurgle that the coffee maker makes when it's almost done dripping coffee? That weird sound that we maybe not pay attention to. It's just part of the machine. What is the smell, the aroma in the air that I sense when I'm doing a pour over or I'm doing a French press? When I'm holding my cup and I'm drinking it, what is the sensory experience I'm having in my hand? How hot is it? And what does that tell my brain about when it's time to sip or how much to sip so I don't burn my tongue, right? And when I'm sitting to have my coffee, is there something happening in the room? Is there light coming through the room that I can just kind of look at and focus on that slows down this process, that slows down this mundane thing of just drinking coffee into something that is space I've carved out for myself? And so that's like a small little thing that happens within a 5 to 10 minute window, perhaps, but it's like something that's tangible, and it does play out in the way that I treat my children or way that I talk to my spouse or the way that I want to come at my work or the energy that I approach my day with. So, Tiny Cup was built to serve, everyday people and giving them this belief, this understanding that they're worthy and deserving of rest. And I think I also had to realize that I'm one of those people. I'm on the receiving end of this very promise that I'm creating. And so it starts with me. So I have to think like, if my pivot is a way for me to model these values, to exemplify this ethic of rest in a way that is small and sustainable, such as drinking my morning coffee, then I'm actually recommitting to myself and to those people.
Yeah. Oof, I love that. And again, like a reminder of the subtle, intentional ways that we can just be more present. I think a healthy relationship with rest requires a healthy relationship with your ability to be present with yourself, understand what you want and need.
Yeah.
And I want to bring this to a close because obviously I could be talking to you for hours. But let me end with this last question for you. And maybe just to help people cast vision for themselves, for people to see what's possible. I'm curious about, what are you doing in this chapter of life that the earlier version of you or the design career version of you would never have allowed?
This chapter is allowing me to make like day-to-day life a priority. I don't think in the past I've made room for like listening to my heart and my needs to just live my life. It sounds like such a foreign concept to me because thinking about living is is actually so far from so many of our minds and our what we're thinking about, especially living within like the Western kind of civilized context of like what it means to work. Work consumes so much of our brain power that when we think about living, we're talking about work a lot of times. And then like the things we have to do outside of work are like the footnotes. It's like, and I also have to do this, but we spend so much of our time working. This chapter of my life, I think, is asking me to spend a lot of time thinking about living and how does work support and supplement that. And in a sense, it starts to run together in a way that feels reciprocal or one supporting the other.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it does. Because I feel like my answer to that question is something similar of one thing that I'm doing this chapter that maybe an earlier version of me would never have allowed is to actually just enjoy
Yeah.
life and the experience of abundance that I'm having. I think what I've recognized is that, and part of it too is being in a different culture that is very different from the States. But I think I'll speak for myself. In the States, like I had this idea and this vision of what joy would be, what enough would be, and I was just chasing it, hoping
Mm-hmm.
to arrive at this place. And now that I've actually arrived at this place of joy and abundance, there was a good 5 or 6 months where I was almost feeling more anxious because I was waiting for the shoe to drop. I was waiting for something
Yeah.
else to go wrong. And I think a lot of us have been taught to chase and pursue and desire these things, but then once we have it, we don't know what to do with it. So I feel like I'm in this season of really just being present and enjoying it, which means I'm saying no to a lot of things to protect it and to nurture it. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
been really, really good.
Yeah, that resonates for me so deeply because it makes me think about what if I hadn't left the US, what my life might still be. And now that I did leave the US, what is possible.
Well, we might need to have a whole separate podcast episode on the impacts of moving abroad and what that's had on our creativity, our spirit. Because I know, again, you moved abroad about a year or so ago. But Michael, I just want to thank you for again just your time. I know that this one's gonna sit with people for a while, and to whoever's listening from inside the in between right now, the in the meantime season, I just want to say that you're allowed to not know yet, and you're allowed to take longer than the story you were handed says it takes. So, just a friendly reminder to the person who's been calling it a busy season for 11 months now. 11 months is a direction. And drink some water.
Yeah. Yeah. Drink some water.
I love it. Thanks for hanging out with us and diving into some of these real and unfiltered conversations. We know your time is valuable, and so we don't take it for granted. If today's episode made you think, if it challenged you, or gave you something new to consider, we'd love for you to hit that follow button on whatever streaming service you're using. That way, you'll never miss an episode when we drop them. And if you want to go even deeper, sign up for our newsletter at choosecourageinc.com. and you'll get updates on new episodes, access to exclusive freebies, and first dibs on coaching opportunities and other resources to help you make bold moves in your life and business. So we appreciate you, we see you, and we're rooting for you. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort, and a friendly reminder to drink some water.